All right. I think we can get started. Waited enough time for everyone to join. So first of all, to anyone who has signed up and joined us this fine morning, welcome aboard. My name is Tom. I'm the Director of Developer Relations here at Lightrun. And before we get started, let's do a bit of housekeeping. So this session is divided into 3 portions. The first one is an introduction. You are listening to it right now. After that, we'll do about 45 minutes or so for the masterclass. And once that 45 minutes is up, we will have 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. You have at the bottom of the screen, right next to you, right here, a Q&A button. Feel free to click it, add questions. We will answer questions chronologically at the time of the Q&A, which means that if you write the questions earlier, you will be able to get them answered as quickly as possible. Please say hello in the chat. We will not be able to answer while during the panel, obviously, but we see everything and we would love to hear from you. Let me also mention that there will be a recording of this session sent to you via email once the session is done a few days later. Other than that, I think we're good. A little tiny bit about where we are and where we are coming from. I work for a company called Lightrun. We build a troubleshooter for a live application. Imagine if you could printf anything, logs, metrics, traces in production, regardless of where your application is running, Kubernetes, serverless, bare metal. You can basically add this type of information in real time in production right from your IDE. So you can do all of that and more with Lightrun. And also we have a free tier right here. You can, maybe you can see my finger or not, right here, lightrun.com/free. Feel free to sign up and play around with the tool today. That's it. No more vendor talk. Let's get right to the session right now. I just wanted to mention that we have around 230 attendees. Very happy to see you all here. So let's get this show on the road. Again, I'm Tom, Director of Developer Relations here at Lightrun. Let's do a quick round of introduction. Leonie, do you want to present yourself?
Yeah, so thanks for the intro. My name is Leonid. I'm CTO here at Lightrun. Most of my background comes with complex distributed systems and from the cybersecurity world. And I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. I see we have attendees from Toronto, from Canada, from Montreal. Hi, people. Pleasure seeing you. Mikita, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mikita, and I work in Netflix, where I try to make other developers happy with the tools and processes that they use, or at least to make them less unhappy than they are.
Excellent. Great introduction. Michael, do you want to step in?
Sure. Michael Wood, I'm a field CTO here with HashiCorp. Of most relevance in my experience is I've spent a lot of time with very large companies trying to improve agility and outcomes for developers. Probably the most tangible there was we actually constructed multiple labs across the globe to prove best practices sort of end to end, and hopefully some of those experiences are useful today.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Ryan, a quick intro.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Menezes. I'm a software engineering manager at Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook. And in my time here, I've always been working on developer productivity in one way or another. I worked on a small team. I worked for targeting hundreds of developers, and nowadays I work targeting thousands of developers and their productivity. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining us, people. It's going to be an excellent session. I'm really excited. So let's get started right with the first question. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to ask a question and then direct it to a specific panel member, and then I'm going to redirect the question to the other panel members so they can answer too. If you are asking questions in the Q&A section, please make sure to mention if there's a panelist you want to ask it specifically to. If not, you can just put it generally and I'll direct it to the room later on. Let's get started. So let's start from first principles. What is your definition of a win for a developer? And I'll give an analogy. Salespeople can close a deal, and that is considered a win for them. For developers, it's a bit more abstract. What would you associate with winning as a developer? Mikita, why don't you start?
Well, in my opinion, developer responsibilities can be split in 2 big chunks. The first part is actually doing work that brings value to the company, solving business problem. And another part is doing things that are necessary but inevitable. I'm talking about things like setting up CI/CD pipelines or upgrading your infrastructure or bootstrapping a project. Like, you cannot escape this work, but it doesn't deliver value directly. And because of that, this work is often considered as toil, as something people are trying to avoid. So minimizing this toil is basically a win for both developers and developer productivity people.
Excellent. Thanks for the thorough answer. Michael, do you want to step in? Michael, you're muted.
Apologies there. Yeah, generally I start from the same place I think Makita's coming from, and we all really should align against the business objective. If you're working for an e-commerce shop and the business objective is to increase revenue attach rate, which is services attached with a product or something like that through your e-commerce site, then that's the goal of the dev team, and you're going to measure success against driving that business metric forward. In the process, though, I want to set goals for learning objectives, which means there's a lot of different ways that we can go after increasing revenue attach rate. And we're going to throw out a bunch of different experiments. So I need to get there quickly and see how that feature reacts in an open marketplace. I need access to production to do so. And I'm going to look for decision points on yes or no, is this meeting our expectation of driving us in the right direction? So I would say one of the metrics that we're going to measure is decision points. I want to destigmatize failure of a feature. Like I don't really care about failures of features. That's key learning. I need to know this is a mistake, throw that out, release something else quickly so that we move towards our eventual goal of improved revenue attach. As an example, if it's finance, it's improved loan payments, or the way that we're handling returns on investments or whatever. So, but whatever that metric is, I want to align against that, and I'm going to drive a bunch of experiments very, very quickly and iteratively at that outcome and see which ones are pushing us in the right direction.
All right, Michael, thank you. Ryan, you want to give an answer too?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what's been said already. As a manager, I see my role as empowering the developers on my team. So I think about this a lot from that perspective as well. And I think at the end of the day, a developer has an idea and they want to see that idea be successful in production in the marketplace. And Michael makes a great point that there's a lot of learning that has to happen along the way. But it's really about getting that idea out there and having it succeed. The one note I'll add is that I think if you want to know what's a win for developers, the best thing to do is go talk to a bunch of developers and learn what it really means to them personally. And that can teach you a lot. And that's something I try to do a bunch.
Right. Leonid, your take?
Yeah. So agree with all the points. Software development, as we all know, is all about trade-offs between velocity and quality, between different architectures. So for me, a win for a developer is knowing that you created a solution for a problem, you delivered value for the organization, but also you understood the risk that you took over these decisions, the technical depths that you created, and you know that you can pay them over the coming year, for example, over the process. And this is what I call an effective developer, to understand all these trade-offs and risks.
So I think everyone here talked about the way developers consider win from different angles, but this is again a kind of the goal to get at, the place to be. How do you actually move towards better developer productivity in your organization? What can people here listening to the session can kind of get a move on today if they want to move in that direction? Ryan, let's start from you this time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tom. To get a move on things, well, I think that you shouldn't be afraid to just start and iterate. Usually people have a lot of intuition, especially if you're a developer and you see things that are broken within your team's workflows. You probably have more intuition than you actually maybe perceive. You might actually understand 60%, 70% of the problem that you're facing, even without measuring it, even without trying to be super precise. So don't be afraid to act. I'll start with that quick encouragement, and we can go hear from others as well.
Excellent. Leonid, why don't you take the next one?
Yeah, I think as if I can continue my previous answer, so if making the right decision for a developer is the ultimate goal, so for me is the way to get there is to provide the relevant context for the developers. For example, to get them to be involved in the business. So to jump on the pre-sales calls, to jump on the customer success calls, to understand the values and understand how customers use the product. And also as we said, relevant context is also how the application they develop operate in production. So they should be involved in the production processes, selecting tooling, selecting how the application is deployed, understand the infrastructure. So both the business side and the production and the operation side. So this is the context. It's better to provide.
So jumping off on that, I think Nikita, who comes from the you build it, you own it culture, would have excellent things to say in kind of countering Leonid's comments.
Yes, I actually have to compliment, to add both to Ryan's and Leonid's comments, because what really resonates with me is that developers already can fix things, because developers know best what exactly is wrong with their processes, with their tools. And when you're trying to improve developer productivity, you have two problems. First, don't fix what's done, what is not broken. And the second part, how do you find what's broken? By talking to the developers, by investigating what's happening to them. If you have a process for developers so they can talk to people and explain what can be improved, that's great. If they actually have a process to commit the fix, to actually improve things, if they have the resources, if they're empowered to do this is even better. That's great. And engineering leaders, in my opinion, should set an example there. If you go and find a problem to fix and you fix it and you review with the people and you share that context with the people and you encourage and praise your developers as they adopt the approach, you see these things propagating throughout your organizations. You see your developer experience being improved.
Excellent. And I think the last one on this round is Michael.
Yeah, I agree. I think as we look at large scale enterprises, sometimes there's a little bit of a trade-off that begins to enter into this discussion, meaning I can have developers that are fixing a lot of things, but how do I defend against 500 ways of doing the same thing? Every team sort of fixing kind of what they're doing.
Reducing duplication.
Every single application is kind of fixing their own tool chains and their own CS. If that's the mantra that we're talking about, I don't know that that's ultimately of utmost productivity for especially a large scale enterprises. I think you do end up with some formalization where specialist teams that really understand a particular layer of infrastructure, let's say security and encryption policy and enforcement and data protections and things like that, I may want to have those things become more consumed by the developer as opposed to remedied by the developer, if that makes sense. Because I want to have a sense of centralized audit to meet OSFI requirements if you're in Canada and you have financial regulatory compliance that you've got to hit and so on. I think you can distribute some of that down, but in terms of productivity, how much cognitive load needs to sit on the head of the developer? They need to understand the business, the code, the operations, the financial impact, the risk that they're imposing. I want them to have a sense of all of those things, but I don't necessarily anticipate that every Ruby developer fully understands the latest homomorphic encryption algorithms and how they can implement it in order to protect data. So I have to find a good blend of what makes sense to be on the developer's table and their responsibility, and what makes sense for me to formalize as part of my software delivery chain so that they can win by getting into production and seeing value. I want you moving to production very, very fast. If you're overloaded with all these other things, you're going to be slow to get to production because I'm trying to solve encryption problems. I'm trying to solve finance outcomes. I'm trying to solve everything. And so I'm going to be a little bit slower. Whereas if I can kind of inherit well-defined policies, well-known patterns, architectures, things like that I can just consume, I can be very quick. And now I can see the results of my work.
Right. And I think that we kind of stepped into the avenue of the next question on the roster. Folks, keep in mind, if you have any extra questions, there's about 308 people in the room right now. I'm not sure we'll be able to answer everyone, but there's a Q&A button at the bottom. Please click it. Add any questions. We'll answer them at the end at the Q&A section. I think that the practice of developer productivity is a bit amorphic, and you mentioned all of you panelists mentioned a few different ways of measuring and acting upon it. But let's talk KPIs. Let's talk actual metrics. How do you measure developer productivity? What are the metrics you would use to actually quantify this practice, this profession, this world that you live in? And I think we can. Let's start with Ryan this time around.
Yeah, thanks for letting me start twice. But as you know, Tom,
Sure.
I'm super passionate about this topic.
Yes.
So the first thing I would say is that it's not about measurement, it's about decision making. So it's usually useful to take a step back and say, what is the decision I'm actually trying to make? And how do the numbers help me make a better decision? Numbers definitely have a role to play, but we should also value expert opinion and other types of subjective inputs, developer sentiment. None of these can really do it in isolation, but put together, they can help us make better decisions. And the book I've loved on this is a book called How to Measure Anything. It's a very good read. And by the way, if anyone listening to this like super passionate about this topic, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love this thing. And I spend a lot of time in it because I'm part of a central developer experience org here at Meta, where we are looking at the experience of people who are building iOS apps, Android apps, AR, VR things. We have to kind of rationalize across all of this, backend infra services. So when it comes down to the actual metrics, I'm going to go a little bit deeper on this one than some of the other questions. One thing that everyone kind of gets is speed. You want to measure how long does it take end to end to get a task done, or what is the tooling cost you paid along the way? How long did you have to wait for CI or CD? How long did you have to sit there and stare at your screen while something was building? So time is definitely one way to measure. A second thing you can measure is bad events. Like I ran a build and it failed for a reason that wasn't really my fault. You can just kind of count up these things that you know are pain points or bad events and try to drive them down. And then the third thing that is really worth measuring is developer sentiment. Honestly, I wouldn't go on that. It's important that developers are satisfied and happy enough that it doesn't cause you problems with team health or retention or team morale and that kind of thing. But the sentiment tends to kind of renormalize to some baseline over time. And it can be very, very hard to move because it can be affected by so many different factors. But it's usually a good indicator. If you just ask people, how satisfied are you? It'll tell you which specific people or which specific teams are having a particularly tough time. And then you can go actually talk to them and figure out what's up with their specific situation. So there's so much more that I could go into. Let me just quickly scan the questions that people asked. The last thing I absolutely want to say is that I think it is an engineering culture mistake to try to quantify the productivity of an individual engineer. Because productivity, like we all know that the impact an engineer has is not easily reduced to one number or lines of code or any of these other things are way too reductive. So everything that I look at in my job around developer productivity, we are always looking at the aggregate productivity of a team or of fairly large teams. And we are never using this information as a way of performance evaluation. I think that's super important to add.
Right. So thanks, Ryan. Mikita, your turn.
I kind of agree with the approach that Ryan taken, but I believe that hard metrics and developer sentiment is kind of a part of the same snake that bites its own tail, because you can measure hard data, you can measure time that it takes for commit to go to production, you can measure number of deployments a day, and you can identify like parts where problems are happening. But when you measure developer sentiment, when you actually ask people, are you happy about this? Are you happy about that? You can find things that you didn't even measure. Like they weren't on your radar. You can ask about particular parts of tech stack or about their satisfaction in general, and that can provide a lot of insights. And then you can start measuring these things, trying to improve the length of feedback cycle, discover new issues, and this circle never ends.
Great answer. Leonid?
Yeah, I actually agree with Mikita. I think that the best is to have the conversation and understand what are the pain points. But also I want to add to what Ryan mentioned, the metrics. It's also important. There are a lot of metrics that are important, the velocity, the quality, the collaboration, but it's important not to measure it on the individual level, like the single developer, but also the collaboration inside the team and those metrics that are a team metric. And those, I think, the way to measure them is, for example, the code reviews, and how they collaborate. If the documentation, how much documentation a developer produces, is it clear enough? So those metrics are like the collaboration metrics, but also they're very, very important because a developer can be very, very productive, but the team is not. So it's also important.
Right. Thank you, Leonid. Michael, let's round around.
Sure, I'll be very quick. I think this is all wonderful stuff. I like the Dodo metrics. It's just kind of a key set of an understanding of what's happening. But again, we have to be careful not to be reductive, because every application is contextual. Certain applications are highly, highly complex and will have slow release cycles. And I don't care how hard you push. It's just something that's kind of a beast of a code base to manage. It's going to be a little bit different. Now you may look at microservicifying, I'll just use that term, or something like that to make it just so that you can move it quicker, but just understand that every app team is contextually bound to the business problem they're trying to solve. And so we like to use things like velocity metrics, which are really good. Mainly if we do it not to compare teams, because every team's going to have a little bit different velocity and path to answering questions. But we implemented a little bit of a practice where we would use 0-point stories to indicate a toil task, the way Makita was talking about. One of the ways that what I need as a signal in order to improve developer productivity is, where is there a loss of productivity? One of the ways to do that is say, hey, in the backlog of the Agile team, when you have to do an architectural review, that's a 0-point story, right? If I need to go before an audit committee and prove this or that or whatever, that's a 0-point story. I need those in the backlog. I need those tracked, and I need to be able to see the graph drop to 0 for a while and then come back up and start becoming productive again. That gives me an area of focus. Now, it may not be something I can immediately remove, but if I'm looking at areas of automation to streamline the delivery of application resources, I need to be able to pinpoint it in the metrics that I'm seeing. And one way to do that, if anybody's thought about trying this, is implement like 0-point stories for things that are outside of feature delivery.
Excellent. This is a very interesting idea. I do want to move on to something that's a bit more, again, moving away from the practical, a bit more to the personal, if you will. So obviously in many organizations today, we have separate teams doing DevOps and development, some organizations more so, some organizations less so. But in a situation that is tense, in places where things get hard, for example, when a production incident happens, how do you see the collaboration between those two teams? How do you see that friction or that lack of friction happen in your own organization? What are the practices? What are the tools? What are the methodologies you use at your organizations? I'll let Leonid start this time.
Yeah. So Tom, as you know, for us is a full collaboration during the incident. The DevOps and the developer are both on the Zoom troubleshooting together. And after the incident, we have a retro. But this troubleshooting session is a learning session, because the developers understands more about the infrastructure, the DevOps understand more about the application, and after that we have a retro that both parties give their understanding from the incident, and we actually take actionable items from that. And we had one incident like that a few weeks ago. So it was fun to see this collaboration, because there was a problem with some customer. We troubleshooted together, the developer knew some different various flags of the application. The DevOps understood more the infrastructure. And together we understood how to create a better Helm charts for us that will be more customizable. So it's a knowledge that we could be only a result of this collaboration. So
right. Thank you, Leonid.
It's important.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I think at a philosophical level, one of the ways that drives really clean collaboration when it comes to troubleshooting is having clean collaboration throughout. If we're already working together on releasing new pieces of infrastructure and software, then it's just kind of a natural part of what we do. I think a lot of large organizations are struggling through sort of ticketed-based processes where there's a faceless organization someplace that does something on my behalf. That's becoming less and less as we move to kind of self-service in the cloud, but a lot of those processes still remain. And a lot of times I don't even know where those folks sit. And so when it comes to troubleshooting, we're on 120-person calls to figure out root cause, because there's no consistent way of measurement. This is also where there's that trade-off between raw developer independence and some type of formalized process which is consistent across development teams. If I have some some standardization about the way that we're going to handle things like visibility and troubleshooting of root cause analysis, some sense of the same kind of language, then it makes troubleshooting much easier. Communication becomes much easier. We're talking the same language. Everybody's not building their own stacks and doing their own thing. Then it's all one-off. We're trying to rediscover, how you tweaked that environment differently than anything that's ever been done before or will ever be done again. Those make kind of that troubleshooting aspect a little bit more difficult. So a lot of what I think about is like machining the things that are non-differentiating as much as possible. How I get compute, how I get network, how I get storage. If I can machine that and then spend my time on the differentiating pieces, I'll have an easier time on the troubleshooting and collaboration because things are a little bit better defined and automated.
Gotcha. Thank you, Michael. Mikita?
I agree with Michael on the necessity of standardization. When it comes to operations, when it comes to communication, it's super important that you don't look for like, whom do I call when I have an incident at 3 a.m.? Like, it's like really important that you have a pre-established channels of communications. And I also want to note that I personally don't think of it as a juxtaposition of developers and DevOps. I'm thinking of DevOps as a culture. Like, I build it, I run it. I think about it as of shifting the collaboration left. Like, if I have an expert who can provide me with a paved path, in Netflix, we have a notion of paved path, a set of best practices that expert developed and packaged so it's easy to use. You can stay on this paved path. You can stop thinking about little things that bite you in production. And you can be responsible for the stuff that you develop, that you deploy and you operate. And it also gives you a freedom. Because if you're responsible for operating the stuff that you built, you can deviate from this paved path and you can say, okay, maybe the standard solution is really not the right thing for me. Maybe I want to experiment with something else. Maybe I want to take this responsibility, understand if something goes wrong, I'll be the one on the front line to fix it, to make sure this thing is running, this thing doesn't break. And if it works, then the developer productivity can help you propagate your solution to the rest of the company. So others can benefit from your experience.
Gotcha. Ryan, last one on the round.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, what Mikita said about like, you build it, you own it, that is the culture that we follow as well. I think it helps straighten up a lot of the incentives. So I won't go much deeper in that. I think you covered it well, Mikita. But the thing I will briefly mention is one of the highest stress situations I've been in the last couple of years is a situation where there's a really large backend service organization here, 400 to 600 monthly active developers building a certain part of the code base, and their build times had skyrocketed. Developers were yelling. It took us like 6 to 9 months to go. First, we really treated it like a production incident, honestly. Like, we filed an incident and started debugging, diagnosing, trying to claw back down the immediate regression. It took us about 6 to 9 months, and we had to collaborate across lots of different teams. My team, the developer experience team, the build infrastructure team, the compilers team. We have a team here working on the compiler itself. The team that owns and operates the development servers, the dev servers that people log into to do their work, and also the team that actually owned the code base. There were some changes we needed to make in the code base, but eventually we did cut their build times by half, kind of like average build times, P90 build times. It was a lot of work, and that collaboration really, really matters. So I love the spirit of this question because it's collaboration that gets you through the hard times. And I think having a clear goal also really helps. The reason we were able to do all of that work is first because we knew what our goal was, and we had the number, we had it on a graph, we had the line where we wanted it to be. And second, because we prioritized relationships. So having a really strong, positive relationship with the people across other teams, or in some cases, depending on the work, many of you are doing, it might even be across companies. Those relationships really matter. And having those, investing in those and having those be well-formed and trusting the people that you're relying on makes all the difference.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm looking at the questions in the chat, and there's a bunch of them, and I don't think we'll get them via chat. If you can ask them in the Q&A, that would be great. We can go through the backlog once we move on to the Q&A section. Let's move on to the next question. Around the same terms, we kind of briefly touched upon this and shared some personal interest stories about how this kind of caught us in production. But in practice, for the practitioners out there trying to improve their orgs in this kind of friction, in this place of friction, how do you provide better visibility to both the ops side and the development side? And specifically, how do you reduce the time it takes to get to a resolution of the incident? And to quote a metric here, people often use the term MTTR, mean time to resolve, which is the amount of time, one other metric you can measure in terms of developer productivity. So what's your take on this? Let's start from Leonid this time.
Yeah, I think it's very important because in recent years, a lot of like cloud native services, the rise of Kubernetes, different services like SNS, SQS, they all contributed to the ease of operations, like the reduced costs, the operation. You use just the services, you don't develop your solutions, but they made our systems more complex. So the mental model of the application is much more complex due to the distributed native of those applications and due to the way a developer write their software. And in order to bypass this complexity, organizations should invest in the visibility to these applications, to these complex systems. So this investment, usually this concept is called observability. And actually Lightrun is developing a tool that actually trying to solve this problem to enable developers to gain a code level visibility into the running applications into production. As you mentioned before, adding logs, metrics, etc. But in general, it's very, very important to invest in this visibility due to the complexity of the systems.
Right. Thank you, Leonid. Ryan, next one.
Yeah, I would just use this as an opportunity to emphasize, like, you build it, you own it is really a critical thing here. And even if like the way that your team or company is set up is not really aligned with that, you can still have this spirit as someone who's building something where you really think about it as an owner and you don't consider it a separate job to get visibility into production, to get fast feedback, to be able to have clear signal about what's going right or wrong in production. That ownership mentality and having that go all the way down to the engineers who are actually, I would say, causing the problems. And I say that because I have caused many of those types of problems over the years.
We all have, that's fine.
we got to be honest about that. Yeah. I just don't want to come across like I'm a manager saying engineers are causing the problems. I've been that engineer, you know, and I'm sure at some point I might again be an engineer who causes a problem in production. So, but we have to be honest about that, right? Like the problems are often triggered by the complexity of our systems. And so the engineers really need that feedback, both in order to figure out what visibility to bake in and in order to diagnose and fix the root causes.
Right, thank you, Ryan. Michael?
Yeah, I'm really in agreement with the you build it, you run it mantra. I think what we're looking at is like, how do I exactly what Leonid was hitting was how do we rationalize all this complexity and make it something that's consumable without becoming wildly burdensome. And that helps us with our consumption of things and our communication and the way that we can collab across these things. And this is why HashiCorp especially thinks of things as delivering things as code. So I want to use whatever service I want to use, I want to deploy whatever technology I want to deploy, but I'd like to codify whatever that is so that I can do things like audit and secure and scan and control and report and have visibility and employ our best practices and things like that. So I absolutely agree. The more that I can sort of codify what I'm doing, the easier it is for me to audit and control and have visibility and communicate what I'm doing. One of the things that actually, if we go back to metrics just for 1 second, one of the things that we can look at in the workflow is FTE. And I can say, in order to deliver this, was a certain amount of FTE time. And maybe that was they were doing some kind of a ClickOps style task, going into a UI, adding resources, reducing resources, opening ports, closing ports, whatever it is that they're doing. I can not only look at that as a cost of the workflow, but also a risk element, because that's something I need to audit. It's something I need to go back and check and make sure we didn't leave an S3 bucket open or etcd was properly encrypted or whatever. Right? I just need to make sure that things have been handled appropriately and we didn't introduce a mistake into the process. So this is where that machining of the process makes it cleaner and easier for me to understand what's happening in the end, because it's written down, it's codified, it's validated, and then it's delivered. And as a developer, I should be able to, drop in new code to that to make changes because I want to experiment, do something new, but it's clean by doing so.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Mikita?
So a lot of people were talking about complexity, and I believe there is another angle there, another danger that awaits us, because when we face complexity, we tend to hide it, to abstract things away, to make things magical. Like I press the button and my code appears in production, and then an incident happens and you need to investigate it, and you may have too much visibility and be overwhelmed with all the signals that you're getting, or you may not have enough visibility because that was magic. So in my opinion, like the trick on the developer productivity side is to find this right balance, like how much data should I expose at which moment? And I believe that we should be really careful with making sure that all the magic that we're creating, all the abstractions that we are hiding away are accessible. So we have a breadcrumbs of things that happened, like what triggered this Jenkins job, which commands were executed at this stage. We need to think about ergonomics of these things. I don't have to click 5 different things to get those logs, especially in the middle of incidents. We need to think about user experience, developer experience at this point. Because when things are working fine, we don't want to look there. But when the substance hits the fan, like when it becomes really important.
Right. Thank you, Mikita. I think Ryan would like a few more seconds to kind of comment on this, right?
Yeah, I just realized there's something I take for granted that underlies this whole topic. Like what we're kind of all talking about is getting creative and having this optimistic view about what can you do to go address these types of problems. And a really important part, in my opinion, of the underlying engineering culture is to have a low blame culture around production incidents. Because if everyone who's involved in diagnosing and fixing these issues feels like it's going to be a blame game and someone is going to get the finger pointed at, like they caused the whole thing, you can never have an open and productive, creative conversation. So I think it's super, super important that we kind of like make sure there's as low blame as possible philosophy, and we kind of respect that when a production incident happens, it's almost always because there were lots of factors that layered together, and we need to be accountable as a team or as a company and not kind of like point the finger at individuals. Just wanted to add that. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, because this is a great stepping point to the next question. I think we'll have one more question. I think we'll have 2 more questions and then we move on to the Q&A. Maybe one more if we have some time. Keep in mind, there's a Q&A button at the bottom. Smash it if you want to ask more questions at the Q&A at the end. So when you reflect, speaking of blame, when you reflect on the least productive cycles you have encountered as a developer, the worst ones, what did they have in common? And if you can give us a bit of sense of time, how much time or resources were wasted in those cycles? We want to hear stories from the trenches, human interest stories, things that happened to you in person, if possible. Michael, let's start with you.
Sure. We were obviously, working in a lab where we were operating into true DevOps fashion, rolling things out into production multiple times a day. Ran into a scenario where the routers began to topple over, experiencing an overwhelming, I think there were 502 errors that were kind of flooding into these routers until they just started to topple over one after the other. And the networking team is just scrambling to solve these things. And naturally, going back to sort of the blame game, we're not sure what's causing incomplete packets to be sent over the wire. But immediately the dev team is called on the floor for, hey, your application's introducing networking errors and this thing is going haywire. The siloed nature of the group, where there were probably 6 different networking teams we had to work through, and we had to try to isolate a subnet, reduce noise. That took us about a day to establish that. It took us about another day, just like troubleshooting through the networking tier, who was the WAN team that was implementing this. And there was some HTML acceleration technology that was in the middle there. So we were bringing all of these various teams together to try to reduce noise, and get down to a root cause. And it took us kind of weeks to get there. In the meantime, it was just solid firefighting to keep the customer experience running in the background, just, constantly re-provisioning the application in different regions to keep it alive. But it was a challenge which just kind of showed that this is kind of what I'm picking at, is that not everything is going to be immediately obvious in and around the operational environment that you pushed with your code. There are other externalities potentially that introduce errors into the chain, and how we communicate and deal with those externalities was the challenge. And so we learned a lot about collaborating more tightly, getting closer with those teams, understanding what automation we could consume and how, and so on.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Leonid?
Yeah, for me, there are actually two things that came to mind that can throw a sprint into a bad loop. The first one is working on the wrong thing. And the second one is reproducing issues without the full context. So usually those two are they tend to waste a lot of time. And actually, as the nature of our product, I see different production environments of different customers. And I can see that sometimes it's not very trivial for a developer to understand what exact version is running in production. And it sounds trivial, but this piece of information is super, super important, because you actually can work on the wrong thing when you don't know the exact version, or you can reproduce the wrong thing. So we had some issues relevant to this one, so that the customer did not understand the correct version that is running in production. And it sounds trivial, but with the current deployments, that there are several versions running in production, and the green, blue, etc., it's not so trivial. And I think if I can suggest something, is to make this version to be accessible for developers that are troubleshooting, and they have a very tough session for debugging.
Thank you, Leonid. Mikita?
I believe for me, the productivity killers is not about these big incidents that you brag about as war stories. I believe for me, productivity killing things are more silent, because for me, the biggest productivity killer is uncertainty. Like when I do coding, like how do I do the next thing? For example, I mostly do Java backend development. And if I need to write some front-end code using TypeScript and React, like what do I do next? Like, okay, we have those hooks. How do I approach them? It's a new mental model. What about global state, Redux, all these things that are new to me? They create cognitive load. So I just sit and try to get my head around it. And it happens more than people notice, especially when you don't even know what is the next piece that you're trying to integrate with, what is the next piece that you're trying to discover and find, when you don't even know when it exists. So here, one thing I can tell that is useful for me personally is a sort of a standardized knowledge base. It doesn't have to be a great big website written by a professional technical writer. Just something simple as agreeing on, let's keep our manuals in Google Docs, let's name our run books this way, can help find the right piece of information and proceed with the next step.
Right. Thank you, Mikita. Ryan, last one on the round.
Thanks, Tom. You asked for a personal question, personal like kind of story.
Yes.
I'm going to go back to sort of early in my career, but I think easily the biggest productivity killer is working on the wrong thing. Easily. Because if you make that wrong decision, then nothing else you do after that matters. Early on in my career, I was working on Messenger backend services, so backend C++ and Java services. And I remember, it's still sort of, I can bring back the feeling. There was a 6-month period where I was just really, really struggling, and I didn't know why. And we weren't actually shipping the thing that I was building, and I felt like I was failing. And at the end of that time, I realized that I had sort of just accepted verbatim the definition of the problem that was given to me to work on. And I never really tried to deeply understand the context around it. And that just sort of sent me off in the wrong direction. That kind of experience, and eventually I sort of was able to turn that around. Once I realized that was what was happening, I could go kind of reevaluate, what am I actually trying to accomplish here, and work in the right direction. But to be honest, that kind of experience never goes away. I think we all know this. We have to fight this constantly. You get to fight it at bigger and bigger scales, hopefully, over the course of your career. And nowadays, as I support 3 teams in the developer experience space here. And I would say there's a way of looking at my work where probably 50% of my time is just trying to understand the problem and make sure that we're going in the right direction.
Right. Thank you very much, Ryan. It's quarter to the hour, and I said there will be 10 minutes for Q&A, but to kind of honor the people who took the time and wrote and questions in the Q&A section, I'd like to get moving on that. Because we have a short amount of time, let's only direct each question to one panelist. I'll direct it to the relevant person. The first question was how to measure the business impact of a single engineer, and that is, again, a specific engineer, KPIs, metrics. Let's take it to Mikita.
I don't think it's the right thing to measure, first of all, because different engineers may be working on different problems. Some people may be delivering business value, completing this sprint, delivering 3 features. And some people may be delivering glue work. Like we productivity people, developer productivity people do that often. Like our work is invisible. How do you measure it? Do you measure it the same way you measure your regular features that are complete? Probably it's not the right approach. You need to be holistical when you look at this picture. You need to understand that some developers work differently. Some people make things easier for hundreds of or even tens of developers, and some people deliver value, and they both have place in this world.
Thank you, Mikita. Moving on. What business from Anthony Angelo? What business KPIs can represent developer productivity? It's nice that they're happy or think they are productive, but from a business perspective, how do I actually measure that? And I think I'll take that to Michael.
Yeah, I think I used an example earlier about kind of revenue attach rate or whatever the business objective is that this team is looking to address. Looking for that to trend in the appropriate direction is the best way to do that. And we can show sort of a little bit of contribution there. But again, there's a lot more that goes into that. Maybe your service offerings just got better. Maybe your you know what I mean? Like, so it's a little bit hard because there's noise in that system. Business kind of moves all the time. Customer sentiment moves all the time. And so, you know, sudden burst of traffic on the website may just mean a pandemic happened and everybody's at home, you know, but it may not directly be associated to the code base that you just dropped. Not that the code base isn't important. It's just, I want to track against those metrics and I want to be driving against the business outcome, and whatever that measure is, it's going to have percentage movement. You know, what's the percentage that we've increased revenue attach, or what's the percentage increase we have in terms of dollars per shopping cart, or whatever it is that we're doing. I can establish good, clean business metrics, but it's going to be contextual.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Michael Pang asked, how do you measure developer productivity? I felt as if we touched on that topic, so sorry, Michael, I'm going to move on. Adam Ben Shmuel asked, a question from a management perspective, what are the tactics that you rely on in order to implement tooling and processes that a certain team is using in other teams as well? That's a perfect question for Ryan, I think. So I'll let Ryan take this one.
Yes, I did notice that question fly by in the Q&A earlier. I would say that from a manager's perspective, I want to build real consensus around some change like this. So what that means is I want the engineers talking to each other openly across the teams, and I want the managers talking to each other openly, and presumably there's also some forum where everyone is together. I also want organizational support, like for us to agree in a broader org setting, like we actually do think it's worth it from a business value perspective to unify the tooling here. That makes a huge difference. So from a manager's perspective, I look at it as aligning across all the different layers of relationships in a company. And it's hard work to build those relationships and build trust. But if the business value is there for doing this kind of unification or migration, I absolutely have done a bunch of work along these lines where I had to go build consensus. It was like, you know, knock on doors, talk to people, hear what's on their mind. You can't always make everyone 100% happy, but you can at least show them that you care.
Right. Thank you very much, Ryan.
If it's okay for kind of a quick example.
Sure, of course.
What we made standard in one of the organizations I was working with was you have to use CI/CD if you're going to be going to the cloud. It needs to be an automated pipe. And then we let them choose whatever they want. We saw 80% gravitating towards a particular tool set, and that was impetus for us to look at a standardization or automation or some sort of platform layer that's easy to consume, so people weren't recreating the CI/CD pipeline, and then we allow for a little bit of experimentation out of the edge because we don't want to miss anything. If something new comes down the pipe that lets us go faster, let's consider it, but we'll standardize when we see a little bit of that, just like what Brian was talking about, a consensus of consumption. Now I can look at some form of standardization automation.
Right. Thank you very much, Michael. The next question is from Numan Kassar. I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. How do you use service maturity to increase service quality, which I assume means whether we measure it to increase service quality? Leonid, do you want to try and take this one?
Yeah, I hope I understood correctly. So the service maturity, you mean like maybe a GA phase, for example. So if they're already paying customers using it in a large scale, how does it related to quality, right? Or that?
I assume that was the intention. Yes.
Okay. So if the solution is already GA and running in a large scale, we should really invest in those tools because it's already a product, an experiment that worked, right? It's a stable product. It should work well. It should work in scale. So I think this is a great phase to understand those tails in the development workflow because we'll need to fix stuff faster. We'll need to push faster. So this is something that we'll understand will be a focus for developers. So it's important to it's a point that says it's important to invest there in productivity.
Right. Thank you, Leonid. The next question is excellent from Alon Coleman. Everything is excellent, but this one is specifically, I really like it. In your perspective, what are the biggest unsolved challenges around developer productivity today? And I think I'll start this time with Nikita.
That's a great question indeed. And I believe we already talked a lot about complexity and cognitive load. And I believe this is the challenge because it's something that we cannot fix with just a technical process. We cannot fix the complexity and cognitive load just by adding one more tool to our technical stack. It's a constant battle. It's the constant search for the right balance. It's the constant search for custom tailoring the processes, the communication to the needs of your specific company and your specific teams. Of course, you can borrow a page from a book, from a different company's book. Like Netflix is a context-heavy company. It's pretty transparent, sometimes on the side of overwhelming developers with context, where people are trying to have to filter that context and share it in digested form while providing the links to the original material. And for you may need something different. So it's definitely a good one.
Excellent. Thank you, Nikita. I think we'll go over to Dr. Bombay. For Ryan, once you measure dev sentiment or bad outcomes, how do you incorporate that as feedback to devs?
Okay, I think I understand the question. So I guess what I would say is I'd focus on going through the right steps of the engineering planning process. So making sure we're having a clear discussion about prioritization and that everyone who needs to be on the same page is, making sure we, as part of prioritization, or maybe even a bit before as part of brainstorming, we're going and talking to people. So as I mentioned before, sentiment is a good indicator for who to go talk to. Maybe it doesn't, I've never really goaled on sentiment directly, but it's a great indicator for knowing who to go talk to. You got to do prioritization. You got to pick quality projects that are moving in the right direction and have good kind of progress indicators for how those projects are going. And then at the end of all of it, you have to have accountability as a team. And what I mean by accountability as a team is that if the prioritization decision was made as a team and I was sort of on board with that, then I take accountability for any like mistakes in there, or maybe the tech lead that I'm working with takes accountability for prioritization mistakes. And we don't like penalize an engineer if they delivered really well on their project, but they weren't really responsible for what direction that project was going in, and it ended up being the wrong call. So I think having a healthy culture of accountability where we're not shirking accountability, and the accountability is like going to the right place. And as a team, we are fully accountable for everything we're doing. That's an important place to end up. So sentiment, I would say, going back to the question, is I would look at it as one piece of a much bigger puzzle of how do we have a healthy engineering team if we're working on developer productivity things or anything else for that matter.
Right. Thank you, Ryan. I think we have time for a few more questions. So from Mehmet Karahan, how do you onboard new engineers or developers? Michael, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so we've taken a number of, number of directions to doing this in various organizations that I've been in. A lot of onboarding is going to be kind of establishing a lot of that context that Makita was talking about. We want you to understand and really be a part of what the mission is and incorporate it into the team. Technical skills are a lot of times, one organization I was working with, we did a lot of pairing. So we would pair a new engineer with an existing engineer. And part of the reason for that is if you've ever studied like sort of cognitive learning, when you're working with an expert, you're actually adopting, well, what's the right word? You are bringing in a level of pattern recognition that you're not consciously aware of. So like you're looking at code and they're looking at code and you're picking up patterns in the approaches that they're taking to kind of solving these challenges that you may not be cognitively aware of, but those skills will serve you down the road. So having that personal experience sometimes is really great. Obviously, all those other elements, we'd love to do kind of demo Tech Tuesdays, kind of showcase results, and that's a constant iterative learning process. We want teams communicating and sharing what they're doing with each other because we're always learning from other teams, challenged with different things, knowledge base, facts, all those typical things, onboard training, clean guides, what are the expectations here? All of that are very useful. But I would come back to kind of Ryan's thing, making sure that the developer understands the problem they're solving, and hopefully you're hiring for passion for solving the problem. They'll, generally speaking, a developer with a lot of passion for solving the problem will almost, I don't want to say onboard themselves. We want to provide guides and we want to make it as available as possible. But someone who's passionate about solving the thing will go out and solve the thing.
Thank you, Michael. And that's, I think, a great way to kind of close up the masterclass and the Q&A session. We have only 3 more minutes left. I want to leave our panelists a bit of time to do a quick summary, a really short one because we only have 2 or 3 more minutes. Makita, do you want to say a few parting words?
Sure. Thank you all for attending. It was a great pleasure discussing all these things that I am passionate about too. And I have a shameless plug. Our organization is hiring. We have a number of open roles. If you're interested in working on developer productivity problems, please DM me in LinkedIn or hit jobs.netflix.com. I'll be happy to talk to you.
Thank you, Makita. Michael.
Yeah, thank you. It was a great pleasure. I love how the conversation kind of came all the way back around. Ryan sort of brought it back around to what success is for a developer is understanding and solving problems and being able to iterate and get that done. So it's always interesting to think through what our objectives are and how we deliver on the promise of enabling developers to solve problems more seamlessly, more cleanly with less cognitive load. I think we're all thinking about it in similar contexts. But there's obviously kind of nuance in those implementations. So hopefully these different perspectives are useful to you. And again, feel free to reach out. I would love to talk, like Ryan said, I love to talk about these things anytime I get a chance. And I always learn from folks, brilliant folks like this on the panel. So thank you so much for including me. Thank you,
Michael. Ryan.
Yeah, I'll do the same shameless plug as Makita. I'm hiring. My team told me I had to say that. But you know, I really love this topic. Loved hearing from everyone else in the panel. The Q&A was excellent. Thank you all who are watching for adding some great questions there. And I think something that occurred to me during this panel is just how important it is to make sure that what we're building is in the right direction and considering that part of the developer productivity story. So that's something I'm going to mull over after this and see if I can apply it to my work. I'm pretty excited for that takeaway. Hope everyone else had some good takeaways as well.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Leonid.
Yeah, we're hiring as well, if you didn't notice, but it was great to host this session. I want also to mention that, in my opinion, the motion of developers gaining more responsibility and the cognitive load is increasing will continue. So this topic is very important to invest in tooling, invest in something that will gain more power to developers. So very important topic, and yeah, happy to host this.
All right, now I do a shameless plug. First of all, repeating my previous comment, we have a free tier, lightrun.com/free. Feel free to go there, play with the product, tell us what you think. We also have a Twitter account, like all good tech companies do, Lightrun Tech. Please tweet at us, DM me at Tom Granat for anything. I'd be more than happy to hear about any type of problem, struggles you have in production, maybe ideas for the next panel. Maybe you want to come on the panel. Just let me know at Tom Granat at Twitter, LinkedIn as well, tomg@lightrun.com. Follow us at Lightrun Tech, Lightrun Community on Instagram, and we're basically everywhere Lightrun on the web. Thank you so much for joining. The recording will be shared with you right after the panel. Panelists, thank you so much for joining. It was a great pleasure, and I hope to see you again in the next panel. Have a good day, everyone, and happy holidays all around, I think, right? So happy holidays. Bye.
Bye.